register.
North Korea has test-fired a ballistic missile. That's according to South Korean and American officials. It exploded shortly after takeoff. The launch, which was from an airfield in Pukchang, came just hours after a special session at the United Nations Security Council in which the US pushed for tougher sanctions on the Pyongyang regime. President Trump said North Korea's latest missile test disrespects China's wishes. Let's speak to Alex Jensen, who's a journalist in the South Korean capital, Seoul, who joins us now. Thanks for joining us here on Breakfast. From what you've been able to piece together so far, what do we understand has happened overnight?
Well, what's happened about 5:30 this morning is North Korea has rather predictably gone ahead with a missile test. I myself predicted this on social media earlier this week because of the news about the UN Security Council. North Korea's rhetoric throughout the week was unhappy that this meeting was taking place, a very special meeting for the first time dedicated to North Korea. And it sees it as being very unfair. It sees it as being hypocritical, particularly from the United States perspective. So what North Korea did, it went ahead with some sort of ballistic missile, probably closer to its cutting edge of development because it failed, just as it did a couple of weeks back with another missile launch attempt, also on a weekend. And by the way, this was the 50th missile launch, we believe, under Kim Jong-un since he came to power in the end of 2011.
And the timing following just hours after this United Nations meeting is significant, isn't it? It's almost like a message in itself.
It's just defiance, pure defiance. And Donald Trump may have responded with his usual tweet by suggesting that there was a wedge being driven between North Korea and China, but that would be such a simplistic reading of this situation. The fact is that Donald Trump is providing the uncertainty here. It's the flip-flopping of Washington between the sensible and less sensible heads, and the seeming working out of this situation so publicly. That's quite worrying. North Korea is just doing its thing as it's been doing for years. The other changing factor, though, could be South Korea. We've got a big election here from May 9th, and that will likely elect a liberal leader who'd be far more willing to cooperate with North Korea. So from Pyongyang's perspective, they can just sit back in the knowledge that really it's business as usual. The uncertainty here really is from the US side.
And talking of South Korea, where you are in Seoul, I mean, what's the reaction on the streets among voters, among normal people there going about their lives when they hear about another one of these tests? I mean, does it frighten them, or has it just become almost a weekly event? It just passes by as unnoticed.
Well, definitely the index of concern is risen, but that doesn't mean we're anything like at fever pitch, to be perfectly honest. And it is, of course, business as usual. Part of that is because you get used to anything in life, don't you, over a period of months, years. But the other major reason is I think people genuinely don't believe North Korea wants to do anything. North Korea has its own very specific agenda. It wants to control this peninsula, but it doesn't want to aggressively expand into other territories. It has already been able to fire on Seoul and has decided not to do that. But the key indicator, if you like, will be for that election. If we were to see a Conservative candidate win, it would reflect, I think, genuine fear, because a Conservative candidate would take security very seriously. Whereas what we're seeing is the front-runner, Moon Jae-in, who himself worked as chief of staff during the so-called sunshine policy era of the mid-2000s of the first decade of this new century, when South Korea was doing a lot to help North Korea, sending aid there and cooperate. And while we might not see the full sunshine era come into place again, we'll definitely see more cooperation. And if people vote him in, they can't be that worried that North Korea is impossible to deal with.
OK, Alex Jensen, thanks very much indeed for joining us from Seoul on Breakfast.
Those are all our main stories this morning. It is 6:34. Mike is here, and there is one